was the most well-known tradition from the ancient world. But what is the real history of Adam and Eve and the serpent? There can be little doubt the Genesis story is Judaic anti-matriarchal propaganda. Let's explore this. In post videos and books, we have already shown in the Archaics research that the elements of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, are connected to real historical events that the Jewish scribes in Babylon turned into a narrative akin to fable. Genesis contains real history, but it is cleverly concealed. Adam and Eve were not real people in the personal, but in the collective, they most certainly were. If the person of Adam was invented by the Jewish scribes from the Near East tablet libraries concerning the race of the Adamu, which is found in many Babylonian tablets, and as we have shown in Sumerian writings, the Eden was a walled enclosure that the Jewish scribes turned into the Garden of Eden, then perhaps, too, the serpent is something entirely else. Perhaps we need to examine this closer. The Judaic writings lead us to believe that the serpent in Eden was a demon, which is from the old root meaning to know, or a knowing one, something with knowledge. The serpent in Genesis is from the Hebrew word nahash, itself derivative of nush, which means to decipher, to find out. The Christian Gnostics believed that the serpent was an instructor. The ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic for the serpent or cobra is the determinative for the term special keeper of concealed secrets. And the serpent sign called the tet in Egypt signifies to speak or speech, to tell. In Egyptian, the hieroglyph and the word for goddess also means serpent. The explanation we get in Genesis that Eve means mother of all living is actually a borrowing from the older goddess religion of antediluvian antiquity. The mother goddess was the center of all pre-flood religious observances. Sumerian goddesses Namu, Ninmah, and Ereshkigal were all three represented by a serpent. Nenharsag was called the Serpent Lady. Philo wrote that the serpent was actually a dragon uttering the voice of a man. And in Greek, drakon means the seeing one, and is a root for serpent. Another word for serpent was ophis, from ophistai, which means to see, a root from which the English word optics derives, or ophthalmologist. Python is yet another word for snake, literally meaning the knowing one, as in the ancient Greek Pythian oracle. In ancient China, the rulers were called dragon kings, and the spiritual rulers of ancient India were the Nagas, serpents. Over and over with the biblical narratives, we are told how to interpret its passages, and more we are finding that we are told what we are told it means is really the opposite of what it is actually conveying. Eve informed the serpent that God had threatened that they would die if they ate the fruit in the middle of the garden. God here is Elohim in these passages, which is plural and means gods. This is not a misinterpretation. This is not a misapplication of the text or syntax, because the text of Genesis itself has the Elohim discussing things among itself in the plural, and I will give examples. "You will not surely die," the serpent said to the woman, "for the gods know that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like the gods, knowing good and evil." Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked after they had eaten of the fruit. So we have here the Adamu, a race of people, commit an act of disobedience prompted by a stranger who had told the truth, that their eyes would be opened. They had been living as animals. The serpent had liberated them. Here is where it gets intriguing. The gods then state to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all the livestock and all the wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Sounds like a loving God to me. So if Adam is a race called Adamu, and Eve represents the matriarchal culture of old, and Eden is actually a stronghold of these gods, then the serpent isn't a snake at all. It is the symbol for someone who was too powerful to kill, or a group of people who were not kept like livestock. The reference to livestock here isn't domesticated animals. This statement is made by the gods, so livestock here is humans. These gods now curse the people of the serpent, for they will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. This is a promise of slavery. But this banishment from the walled enclosure, the Eden, was racial. The gods declared, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." A hatred would be fostered between the people of the serpent, who were banished from Eden, and the descendants of the Adamu, the earthborn race that the gods were overlording. The term, "your offspring," infers this is entirely racial between two different groups of humans. What is said next is very revealing. To the woman he said, "I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. With pain you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Not a loving God here. And the statement is totally a gloss over of the enslavement of a matriarchal people. The whole Genesis narrative here is misogynistic. Your husband, and he will rule over you. And the gods told Adam, which is actually the race of Adamu, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return." Kicked out of Eden, basically insulted, absolute slavery. And lastly, the gods talk to themselves. The actual word-for-word passage is, quote from Genesis, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." We are dealing with three separate groups here. The gods, overseers, operating out of a fortress that was well provisioned like a resort at paradise. The Genesis statement, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," means that the gods were humans. Then there's a faction, the serpent people, among them that did not like the treatment of the overseers toward the third group. This was a benefactor group. They were later demonized. Then the third group is the Adamu, the uneducated Neolithic humans of totem societies venerating the goddess. They covered the world. This was a revolt of primitive humans who had awakened to the fact that the gods were no different than they were, also human and able to die. The revolt was instigated by the rulers of the people, matriarchs, so they were doled out the punishment of childbirth and of being ruled by their husbands. Humans rebelled from the labor and escaped a walled enclosure called the Garden, called Eden, and the Anunna promised that mankind would die. Tablets from the Sumerian city of Nippur tell of the arrival of the Anunna to a mountainous region. They set up a camp in a fertile land and called their settlement Eden. These are the Karsag tablets, and Eden is a name implying a walled enclosure. The Jews in the vast libraries of Babylonia found all the elements of this history and wove it all together into a Genesis narrative. There was no Cain and Abel, but there was a race of people called the Kanu. Stories of banishment, of the serpent Enki who favored mankind, records of matriarchy in these walled fortresses. Babylonian tablet number 74329 in the British Museum, translated by W.G. Lampert, tells of the beginning of a group of people who were plowmen called the Amakandu, or people who in sorrow roam. It named Cain, Canu, and also mentions his brother's blood in the soil. He also built a twin-towered city in which he ruled. In the end, the serpent told the truth. He was a benefactor. The serpent in Eden of the Old Testament said, "Ye shall be as gods." This is Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. But in the New Testament, it was none other than Jesus who said, "Know ye not that you are gods?" And the person of Jesus, in the personal, is a great controversy. But in the spiritual, his identity has always been as a benefactor to humanity, and he has shown up on earth many times in many avatars. This interpretation of Genesis and what was really happening is the subject matter of my series, The Anunna Files. I assure you, you may have thought you know Anunnaki history, but you'll probably be surprised about what these 30 videos convey. The story of Adam and Eve is a very old one, but it doesn't go back to first causes. It's not among the most ancient pieces of literature in our world. In fact, the entire story is an invention. Now, Eve was first created in the Genesis narrative. As the story goes, Eve ate an apple from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the entire world suffered the introduction of sin. In the ancient Achaean version, later adopted by the Greeks, Pandora opened a forbidden jar. Later it was called a box, Pandora's box. And instantly all the evils and sorrows of the world escaped, and she shut the lid too late. Only one thing remained left in the jar. I'll let someone in the comments section below add that detail. But these narratives today seem silly, and many think purely mythological. But that is not the case. During the vapor canopy period, whole civilizations were thriving and at peace. They were ruled by the matriarchs. These were structured into a network of guilds, temples, groves, and a hierarchy that all served the goddess. The doom shape appeared in the sky, and there was earth shaking and floods, but the people lived on unaware that on the other side of the world, across the vast deep, which we know of as the ocean, those civilizations were completely destroyed. So strangers arrived in warships, whole crews appeared, but they were all males. They were bearded and they had advanced weaponry. These new arrivals to the old world could not be opposed. Their science seemed like sorcery. The matriarchs, they were forced to trade the daughters of men for secrets, for science and peace. The children of these strangers and the daughters of the matriarchy were unlike the males and females of their own blood, and many grew to great height, strength, and prestige. Basically, a whole new race was created from two separately distinct genomes. In a short time, the newcomers, aided with the numbers of their offspring, overtook the sanctuaries of the goddess and established their garrisons, established trade unions and military orders they founded upon the principles of patriarchy that they brought from overseas. During the height of Babylon, this is like 700-800 years later, the patriarchy had all but vanquished the power of the goddess in politics and religion, though far out in the wooded groves, she was still venerated. Her sibyls and oracles were preserved. The Babylonians recorded events centuries after the collapse of the vapor canopy, known then as the Great Flood. The Jews, later in the great libraries of Babylon, they didn't understand these annals and invented the Adam and Eve story, blaming Eve for the sorrows of the world. They didn't understand that what they were reading in the Babylonian narratives was about the early race under the matriarchy called Adamu, and another group of people called the Kavites, which translates to as Adam and Eve. Now, the blame was entirely political and carried over into many mythological systems where females take the fall for introducing the ills into society. Pandora is a continuation of the patriarchy's war against the older goddess faiths. The strangers who appeared and changed history were the Anunna, and these were those few fleets that escaped the total destruction of North and Central America. This is the real history of the Anunnaki. This is what people need to be looking into, rather than these Zecharia Sitchin version-based fallacies that so many people have fallen for. I have over 230 videos, and I go into a lot of depth, and I cite my sources as to where this information is coming from. It has to be pieced together. There is no one ancient record that tells the whole story. This is the business of the historian. And many people become jaded in this time because they're finding that their own beliefs, the things that they have held to be true, are false. So instead of embracing the correct information, which I bring to the table over and over in my videos, people fall into despair and they go to the opposite extreme. It's like mentally they're polarized. And I get it. I am not offended by this. But I read in the comments section all the time where people come across this wall, cognitive dissonance, instantly shoves them to the opposite end of the spectrum. Now that they have seen evidence that their own belief is untrue, they go to the opposite end of the spectrum and say, well, how do you know the truth? How do you know that you got all the right information? And I don't. But I do know this. Not one single date out of thousands of dates that I have taught about in all my published books, in my hundreds of posts, and my 230 plus videos, I have never deviated from a single date in all these thousands of patterns that I have showed you in my research. I don't have to, because I found the structuring. It's there for anybody to see. But you can't take one of my videos and dissect it and think that you have disannulled anything that I have found, because what I am revealing the actual structuring of reality through a series of videos. You have to take it as the whole. You can't take it piecemeal. It doesn't work that way. The subject matter is far too complex and all-encompassing to be dissected in pieces. If that's what makes you comfortable, then go ahead and do it. These videos are not for you, especially my published books. Now, when it comes to the histories of the patriarchal war against the matriarchy, this is what the Anunnaki arrival. Well, I say Anunnaki, but I'm only doing that because this is the frame of reference by which 90% of my viewers understand history. It's actually Anunna, or the children of Anu, or the children of An. Anunnaki came much later. As a matter of fact, the term Anunnaki never entered the historical record in any ancient clay cuneiform tablets until centuries after the Anunna were gone. And that is a problem. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I have many videos that discuss the Anunnaki in the Anunna files. And there's not a lot of information we can glean about the matriarchy, because the erasing of their history has been so complete, and we see it only in fragments. And these fragments are put together, and it's the best that we can do under the circumstances. Hey guys, this is Jason. I'm recording this video on my tablet because apparently the Windows Movie Maker that I paid for a lifetime subscription actually sucks. It's been like 11 days since I released a video because this software is pathetic. I'm gonna go ahead and uninstall it, and I'm just gonna keep trying until I find the right movie maker. But right now my tablet will suffice. Now onto this video. Any theory of world history needs to be chronology based, or there is nothing to build upon. The construction of a theory needs perimeters, or you get what you have today. A kindergarten fantasy version of Atlantis, of Anunnaki living hundreds of thousands of years, a totally ridiculous notion of people believing without evidence that the Great Flood of the historical record was in some impossible 12,000 BC date. All of these can easily be disproven by a simple review of the chronological references we have preserved from ancient writers. Without a workable timeline backed by solid sources, a theory of world history is just an amorphous data cloud that will blow in any direction that you fancy. Such fallacy won't be found in the Archaix research. If you're new to my channel, this video is going to be a strange listen. For my followers, for those who are on the trail of Artificial Intelligence X, enjoy this new presentation. Until now, the Anunna files disclosures and the Anunnaki histories and the Phoenix Reset chronology have been presented separately, two distinct series of videos. These are two distinct bodies of knowledge involving separate histories, separate narratives, and totally different chronologies. And in this presentation, you will see what I have found, that AIX has provided a bridge linking the two bodies of knowledge and what it means for us today and tomorrow. We have examined the Anunna neuro-chronology and found that it involved the belief in a lost star, a lost world, and a people who became lost, but were regarded by others as gods. This 600-year timeline involves the journey of worlds, planets, away from a dying star, Nemesis, to the present Sol system. We have learned that our own world, Earth, is itself an intruder planet. It was followed here by the first world, Appen or Phoenix, then the Moon, and last in the historical record appeared the Nemesis X object. Many today call it Nibiru. This timeline is verified by many species of analysis, and we will not revisit those here. My videos are for those who seek to earn the truth, not have it given to them. We found in this chronology a problem with the destroyed binary solar system, planets catapulted from the dying sun to the younger Sol. This is referred to as the Anunnaki neuro-chronology because of the actual historical references in the Near East text of the Anunnaki being associated to the stars, to timekeeping, and to the specific number 600. In 4039 BC, a dead world from the Nemesis system was caught in Earth's orbit centuries after Earth first appeared here. This was the capture of Luna and caused the capture flood. Hundreds of millions of people died. Civilizations collapsed. The Anunna were already thriving on Earth, many having survived the Nemesis destruction and freezing journey to Sol in their deep Earth biospheres. 600 years later, exactly, the Nemesis X object passed through the system on its 792-year orbit, as disclosed in detail in my Anunna files. It was the year 3439 BC. The Anunna, led by Enki, entered the historical record, and while the sensationalists assert only the later Babylonian superstitions of the Anunna descending from the stars, this was only half true. In distant antiquity, the Anunna did enjoy space travel, but in the historical record in 3439 BC, the Anunna, led by Enki, arrived by ships on the watery seas. Copying this history in Babylon, the Jews understood the chronology in their own copies, and they called Enki by the name Enoch. And this is why the biblical date for the birth of Enoch is the same as the arrival of Enki. It is the 35th century BC. But this arrival was not accidental. This was 600 years after the capture flood caused by the moon. Now, in 3439 BC, Nemesis X object passes close by and it kills a third of the human race in flooding, which is called the Gihon flood, for which I have revealed in prior videos, posts, and published books. The American civilizations of the Anunna were totally wiped out, and this is why fleets of males appeared all over the old world in the infancy of Sumer, Egypt, Urartu, Anatolia, Harappa, the Yangtze Valley in China, and the Urubamba of South America. 600 years later, we have the beginning of the Anunnaki dynasty starting at Badtabira, the 7 kings of Sumer, in 2839 BC, and the birth of the hero Noah, who was the progeny of a union of gods and men. 600 years later, we have the epic and worldwide renowned Great Flood. The Anunnaki nerve system marks the appearance of the moon, which caused a cataclysmic flood. Then the appearance of the Nemesis X object to cause the Gihon flood. Now the neuro-chronology marks the great flood of Noah in biblical infamy as the year 2239 BC. And true to form, it is another object from the dying Nemesis system that causes this most terrible of flood catastrophes. It is the Phoenix. The Earth, the Moon, the Nemesis X object, and the Phoenix. These are the themes of the Anunnaki neuro-chronology. The flood date of 2239 BC is not in question anymore. With so many ancient citations, scientific reports, chronological calculations, the traditional evidence, chronometrical references in the architecture of the Great Pyramid of Giza, or modern mathematical scrutiny that's found in my videos and books, I am no longer compelled to attempt to convince anyone of this truth anymore. In fact, we can set aside every single piece of evidence and proof we have that the Great Flood was in 2239 BC and just simply rely on the Phoenix chronology of 138-year resets, mud floods, and cataclysms, and still we get 2239 BC as the date of a vast destruction. In 2239 BC, every civilization on Earth suffered a reset. The fact that it was widely remembered as the single worst catastrophe in human memory should not be surprising once we realize that it is the nexus that connects the Anunnaki neuro-chronology of 600-year periods to the 138-year appearances of the Phoenix. That the nerve system and Phoenix chronology converge on this fateful year necessitates a closer examination of how these two systems interface throughout the centuries and millennia after the flood. It is my position that these are simulated protocols designed to preserve situational truths while appearing random and even natural. They are anything but. I will show that not only are these a part of a simulated holography masked as history, but that by carrying out the full program timelines of 600-year periods, 138-year periods, and 792-year periods of the Nemesis X object, as we have preserved their appearances and effects in the historical record, not only will it become obvious that we can predict the next series of events that will occur in our lifetimes today from 2022 onward, but if the history and future of the world is structured as a holographic simulation, then the present is all simulated as well. In Archaix 2.0, I will now fully outline the Anunnaki neuro-chronology superimposed over the Nemesis X object chronology and the 138-year Phoenix visitations. This synthetic timeline will unlock the future. You will learn what our predecessors knew when they designed these calendars and monuments that still stand majestically in Egypt. The future is a continuation of an ancient architect's blueprints, and these designs were well concealed and yet hidden in plain sight. The template of tomorrow has always been with us. From distant times in the records of the Anunna, it was always known as the Tablet of Destinies. We have all bought into the romanticized version of ancient Egypt. Hollywood has done a great job in falsifying this narrative and this history. Plato and Solon, told by Egyptian priests the high antiquity, a pretended antiquity of ancient Egypt, has gone far in completely creating narratives and history that just did not exist. Our historians have had to fabricate the chronologies of other nations just to make the Egyptian chronology comport with what they believed rather than what the data shows. There are two Egypts. We're not going to talk about the first one here. We don't know anything about it. It was pre-cataclysm. They left the Great Pyramids, they left the Sphinx, they left the Giza complex, they left the Osirion. They didn't leave much else. But the Egypt we're going to discuss is post-cataclysmic. It's the Egypt that came into existence, according to Manetho, 350 years after a cataclysm. Enjoy this presentation. We're going to go deep. You're going to see things that scholars and Egyptologists don't want you to know about ancient Egypt, but it's the truth. and Professor Waddell, almost 100 years ago, published this information and has been ignored ever since. There are two Egyptian histories. One is pre-cataclysm before 2239 BC and involves Shimsu-Hor, a people who are technologically advanced. They become the subject matter of many Egyptian traditions, and they are not the focus of this video. This video covers the history of Egypt after a massive cataclysm. This cataclysm is explained by Egyptologists as the first intermediate period. It's because they really don't want to admit what several other scientists around the world in 1998 have concluded, is that the entire Old Bronze Age, every single civilization suffered a reset, a cataclysm that basically depopulated the entire world. Egypt, they wash over this period in all the text literature with the first intermediate period, and they describe it as a period of disarray. The Egyptian civilization was disunited, but it's actually a cover. Now, the Egyptian historian priest Manetho held that for 350 years Egypt was in a state of chaos. It had been destroyed. 350 years is not a continuation of a civilization. It is a hiatus that pretty much necessitates the end of a civilization and the beginning of another. They just happen to both be geographically located at the place that we call Egypt today. The dynastic Egypt that we're familiar with begins in this video. This is what this narrative is about. Not the Shimsu-Hor, not the pre-cataclysm civilization that was technologically advanced. We know little about them, other than they built the Giza complex and the Great Pyramids in Abydos, Sirion, and then left. Manetho wrote that after this 350-year period, Men appeared, the Greek means. He appeared by ship. He was also referred to as Kadu, which means commander-in-chief of the ships. But what's really interesting about Men is that he was a foreigner, and admittedly so by the Egyptians. Menes was the first dynastic ruler of Egypt. He is also referred to by Egyptologists as Narmer. In his Egyptian palette, he called himself the King of Uri. Again, Assyriologists are very familiar. This is the city of in Sumer. It is not Egyptian. He came from somewhere else, and evidently the texts are leading us from the first dynasty. We are led to believe that he came from Mesopotamia. While many Egyptologists are loath to admit that the very first dynasty of Egypt was actually Sumerian in origin, this in fact is the conclusion of one of the leading Sumerologists, Waddell. Professor Waddell specifically wrote that Men's entry into Egypt began a very significant Sumerian presence. He established the city of Mennefer, which we call Memphis. This is the subject matter of this most profound video. The very first dynasty of Egypt was Sumerian, and so was the second, third, fourth, and fifth. And this is why Egyptologists have never accurately interpreted the writings from the first 5 dynasties. They can't, because they don't admit they're Sumerian logographic. In the tablet of Abydos of Pharaoh Seti I and his son Ramses II, they list the names of the 75 predecessors before their reign. The very first on the list is Mena. He is the very first ruler in the Egyptian kings list. Mena is the exact same name as Anum of Sumer. In the Sumerian writings, we find that Anum was famous. He is the author of a Sumerian inscription that mentions the building of the Great Wall of Uruk, a Sumerian city. We will revert back to more on Anum and as it applies to the first ruler of Egypt, Menes, in a moment. Now we will delve into the actual research of Professor Waddell, the most fascinating historian who is been blackballed pretty much by Egyptologists because of his discoveries. Except for the royal names, the first Egyptian dynasty inscriptions have hitherto remained undeciphered.
Further complicating this is the widely published fact that the two leading Egyptologists, Sir Flinders Petrie and Wallace E. Budge, cannot agree on the translations of the first dynasty names. How can proto-hieroglyphic writings in Egypt not be understood by Egyptologists? Professor L.A. Waddell, in his astonishing research in 1930, published the answer in his book, The Egyptian Civilization, Its Sumerian Origin and Real Chronology. And because Egyptologists are isolationists, they refuse to search outside ancient Egypt for the answers to the archaeological and historical riddles. This closed-minded mindset continues to be perpetuated by Zawi Hawass and other leading authorities in the Egyptological movement today. Professor Waddell found that the ancient Egyptian language, though its idioms were laterally Semitic, had its chief cultural and official root words or word stems to be radically of Sumerian origin. Of the 600 or so root words and verbal roots in the Sumerian language, practically every single one of them are found in ancient Egyptian, as well as throughout all branches of the Indo-European languages. Egyptian and Semitic scripts are read from right to left. The early Egyptian dynastic hieroglyphs are misunderstood and left untranslated because the scribes took Sumerian script and reversed the direction of the text. Indo-European writings are always left to right. The Egyptian hieroglyphic system is but a local reversion to the earliest style of Sumerian picture writing. Waddell's next link in the chain of evidence that the Egyptian hieroglyphs are slightly modified conventional forms of Sumerian diagrammatic picture writing is that it gradually came into use during the reign of Menes and his successors, the hieroglyphs having the same phonetic values as their parent picture signs in Sumerian. The pre-dynastic inscriptions of early Egypt, especially at Abydos, are of early Sumerian script, not yet in the later conventionalized forms of the hieroglyphics so famous today. These writings, though misunderstood by Egyptologists, were in fact discovered by Sir Flinders Petrie in one of the oldest tombs at Abydos. Waddell notes that the inscriptions of Menes at Abydos were in Sumerian writing of the Sargonot period and in the Sumerian language. Petrie, in the year 1901, wrote that these were the earliest known use of hieroglyphs in Egypt, though they remain untranslated. The link to the Sargonon period dates Menes to 1947 to 1899 BC. And this is proven in that Egyptologists render Menes, which is Greek, the name as Mina, the reverse of Anum, a Sumerian king under Sargon I of Akkad, who ruled as Egypt's first king according to the Book of Jasher. Egyptian records hold that Menes ruled for 50 years. In the ancient Hebraic rabbinical Book of Jasher, we find that Anum ruled Egypt as the first king for 50 years. They are the same person. Manetho begins Egyptian king list with Menes, the first king of the first dynasty, following the king list of Pharaoh Seti I of some 7 or so centuries prior to Manetho, who also began Egyptian dynastic history with Menes. With Menes linked to Sargon I, Anum, and even Amar-Udak, later known as Nimrod to the Hebrews, Professor Waddell further found the history of Menes perfectly recorded also in Mesopotamian and Indo-European records. This is where the story gets really intriguing. His astonishing discoveries reveal that the Puranic king lists of the early Aryans and Sumerian Mesopotamian king lists, both supported by inscribed monuments, are of the exact same historical record. An entire agreement, and they're all congruent from the first dynasty of both the Aryan and Sumerian. Similar not only in names, titles, order of succession, and exploits of the kings, but also correctly matching their consorts and their sons. Egyptologists render Menes as Mina, but the alphabetic value of the last letter is more accurately translated by the Berlin scholar as J, Mange. In his Egyptian inscriptions, Manj usually bears the title of Manj the warrior, but in the Sumerian king list and his own inscriptions in Mesopotamia, he is the son of Sargon the Great and styled as Manus the warrior, or Manus Tusu. This corresponds to his Egyptian title of Aha-Manj. The Egyptian and Mesopotamian records are fully supported in the Aryan texts of India concerning Elam and the Harappan regions. In the Aryan Puranic chronicles, Menes is called Asa-Manja, or Manus the Shooter, in the solar version of the king list, and as Manasayu, or Manus the Uniter, in the lunar chronicle. Menes is famous for being the uniter of Upper and Lower Egypt. In the Mahabharata, he is Manasyu of the line of Prabhu, which is Pharaoh, or better known to us as Pharaoh. The royal eye of Gupta, which is Copt, or Egypt. In the Vedic Puranas, he is the son of the mighty world emperor, King Kuni, or Shakuni, Sargoni, or Sargon, a famous name arbitrarily Semiticized by Assyriologists as Sargon. In Akkad, his name was Sharukan. His son was Naram-Sin, famous on the steels. You've all seen the pictures of the horned giant defeating his enemies. That is Naram-Sin, the son of Sargon. He is none other than Menes. He is Anum. Menes was a Sumerian governor for Sargon I over the Harappan Indus Valley provinces, in control of a maritime empire. He was basically an admiral over ships, fleets. But then he revolted against Sargon I and annexed Egypt. Before this revolt, he invaded the east to subdue them when they rebelled against Sargon. An original diorite monument sculpted in Mesopotamia as he campaigned abroad specifically reads, Manishtusi means Anum, king of the city of Kish, when Anshan and She'edin, Persia and Indus Valley region, he had smitten the lower sea, the Persian Gulf, Arabian Sea, in ships he had crossed. 32 kings and cities on the other side of the sea he had rallied to battle, and he had defeated them, and their cities he smote. Where the battle occurred is unknown, believed to have been in the Red Sea coasts, leaving Upper Egypt open to attack. Professor Waddell believed these kings controlled the Sinai, Arabian, the African coasts of the Red Sea, a territory adjacent to and anciently called Magan, before Egypt even existed. There are several inscriptions of Manishtusu, the warrior, having crossed the Persian Gulf or Indian Ocean to the Arabian coast with a victorious army. They also read that he called himself the Smiter of Elam. Again, the connection between Mesopotamia, Elam, and Egypt at the end of the reign of Sargon, Amar-Udak or Nimrod, is also found in the Hebraic rabbinical book of Jasher and the book of Genesis in chapters 14 through 15. It is the first war recorded in the Bible, and there were giants involved. His cruciform monument in Sippar of Sumer is 12-sided and records his conquest of Anshan, which is Elam. Pictures are in this video of that cruciform monument. After this conquest, the Puranic record of India holds that 60,000 of Sargon's men followed Manus in his revolt. This was a civil war. The son took the armies of the father. He sailed from Harappan ports to conquer Upper Egypt and establish his own domain, and defeated the 32 kings in response to the rebellion. When all lands revolted against me, he said. Under Sargon, Anum, we know of his means, ruled Elam and Upper Egypt and Magan, and when Sargon's Akkadian empire broke apart into splintering kingdoms in the year 1899 BC, Menes, his son, also known as Naram-Sin, hurriedly smote Elam, which was Persia. the Indus Valley, Magan and Upper Egypt, also revolting against Sargon of Akkad. He became basically the first pharaoh of Egypt. Menes defeated the Magan Federation and entered Upper Egypt. Egyptologists believe Menes entered Upper Egypt by way of the Red Sea, somewhere east of Coptos and Abydos. He did not need to invade Lower Egypt because it was uninhabited. The Delta Giza region of Lower Egypt by earthquake rose out of the Mediterranean in 1899 BC after 340 years since the Great Deluge in 2239 BC, which was a phoenix reset and is covered by many of the videos and posts of Archaix. Lower Egypt was founded by Menes, who united it to Upper Egypt. He built his capital as Memphis. Professor Waddell notes that the oldest statues of God in Egypt are 3 gigantic limestone figures of men at Coptos bearing signs of Red Sea shells and swordfish. The Copts are native Egyptians as opposed to Arab immigrants. Thus, Menes introduced civilization into Egypt. The chronological references discovered by Professor Waddell show that he ruled as the first king of the first dynasty for 50 years until he died. During his reign, Lower Egypt was explored. The antediluvian buildings and pyramids of Abydos and Giza found and excavated, among them the fantastic labyrinth for which tradition links to Menes. This connects Menes to the famous king Minos of Crete, builder of the labyrinth. And the bull and the horns. The Greeks claim their god Zeus was from Crete, and Abydos and Thebes are also cities in Greece. These are carryovers from immigrants. Minos' son was the Minotaur, or the bull of men, and the son of Pharaoh. Menes was known as the strong wild bull, which was a Sumerian epithet. Like Minos of Crete, Menes of Egypt was a major Mediterranean sea power. Both Menes and Minos were the beginning of their civilizations. Builders of cities and fleets, lawgivers, wealthy, and both died on a major sea voyage in the West. Sir Arthur Evans dates early Minoan period 1 with the first dynasty of Egypt. Waddell wrote that from Menes' kingship over Egypt to the end of the first dynasty passed 182 years. This is very significant. Professor Waddell's chronological data in showing that 3 to 4 different regions all lived at the same time and are identified as the exact same person completely nullifies the Egyptian argument of its own pretended antiquity. The Egyptian civilization we know of today is younger than Sumer. It is equal to Babylon. It is younger than Akkad. Ugarit, the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, they are all the Hittites, the Amorites of Mitanni, the Hurrians, the city of Urartu. Says these most ancient civilizations are contemporary with the first dynasty of Egypt. The pretended antiquity of the Egyptians is what fooled Plato into believing in this Atlantis myth, which was nothing but a transatlantic war that occurred in the Greek times, the Achaean times. We're talking about 2nd millennium BC. It couldn't have been 9000 BC. There was no Egypt at that time, nor was there a Greek civilization. It was during the first dynasty of Egypt, as we show in another video, that Brahma and Saraswati, known in the Bible as Abraham and Sarah, visited Pharaoh's court in Egypt at a time when a giant excavation was going on, and they found the plans with numbers, the hidden chambers of Thoth. They found the Giza complex and the Watcher, later in the Gnostic writings called Kalapatoroth, which is the Sphinx. They found these in the desert and were excavating them, and were amazed that Abram or Brahma knew the sacred writings of Thoth and taught them. This was the exact same time period. It was the first dynasty of Egypt, which leads us to Zechariah Sitchin's writings. The early Sumerian pictographic texts are identical to pre-dynastic Egyptian pictographic texts, according to Sitchin. And in the early Sumerian depictions, as shown by Zechariah Sitchin in his book, The Wars of Gods and Men, we are confronted with scenes of pyramid construction, a smooth-sided pyramid, a serpent symbol denoting Enki, and a sphinx. Amazingly, and totally missed by Sitchin, on page 141 of his book is a Sumerian pictographic image showing a pyramid supporting two ladders pointing at a disc, the Egyptian ladder of Set, so prominent in the Book of the Dead. I was very surprised he did not mention this. Now, Sitchin notes that in Egyptian, the word for gods was Neter, NTR, or one who watches. This is in Stairway to Heaven on page 103. The hieroglyphic sign for Neter, gods, was a pole with a flag, basically an ensign. Sitchin cites Margaret Murray's In the Splendor That Was Egypt, concerning the pre-dynastic pottery adorned with drawings of boats carrying a pole with two streamers as a standard, which Murray concluded became the hieroglyphic sign for God in ancient Egypt. Now, Sitchin notes that the interesting thing is that these pre-dynastic drawings showing boats arriving from a distant land, towers, and a standing tall figure wearing horns was basically the mark of the Neter. Sitchin concluded the Egyptians affirmed from the very beginning that their gods had come to Egypt from elsewhere. The Ta-Neter was the narrow straits at the southern end of the Red Sea through which the ships had arrived bearing the newly arrived gods of Egypt, the horned gods. These are Sitchin's words, not mine. The invader and founder of a unified Egypt means he was like a Viking. One who watches is a watcher, which gives us, which is a direct connection to the Enochian writings about the watchers before the flood, and how they brought civilization to the Neolithic cultures that were existing at the time. But Sitchin embellishes in his theory. He promotes the idea of spaceships landing in these different civilizations and performing these deeds, but the earliest records do not convey this. They're wooden ships. Their leaders have horned helms. They bring technology and civilization, but they do it from the sea, not from the sky. Sitchin also knew the discoveries of Professor Waddell that proves that the first dynasty of Egypt was not Egyptian, it was Sumerian. But he ignored them to publish his sensational theory of space invaders. The early second millennium BC texts paint a story. It's one that is totally ignored by our historians and our archaeologists. So compartmentalized are these different specialists that they can't put the picture together themselves because they're not allowed to see what other researchers they don't peer review what other historians and archaeologists are publishing. But the picture is very clear. The Sumerians were a people who survived a very tragic old Bronze Age world cataclysm. They survived with most of their infrastructure intact. They left whatever world they came from and arrived in ships, and they arrived everywhere. In Europe, Asia, India, the Arabian Sea, the Egyptian coast, fleets of these people showed up everywhere. They claimed to have come by way of Dilmun, but they were from somewhere else. Egypt's history begins with Babylons and Akkads and Ugarites and Urartu and the Hittites and Mitanni, the Amorites, and so many other civilizations. These people showed up and they brought all this information and this technology and these histories. And they came and established basically what we know of today as the Old World. Egypt's history is no different from the rest. Their pretended antiquity has been shown to be false over and over and over. Just because pyramids and ancient temple structures of Technolithic design are found within the geographical confines of a later nation called Egypt does not mean those original structures were Egyptian. No more than structures found in Mexico are Mexican. It's the year 1967. Nancy Hearn is digging in her flower bed and she comes across a stone. Cleans the dirt off of the stone and finds a script that she's unfamiliar with. No big sensation, no news headlines. LaGrange, Georgia. Scholars come across the stone. Sumerian cuneiform dated 2050 BC, 37th year of the reign of King Shulgi of the Sumerian city of Ur. How did a Sumerian tablet find its way in Georgia of the United States 4,000 years later? I'm going to tell you how. A picture of that tablet is going to be in this video. But scholars have noted in their research on the Enochian texts, the Book of Enoch is very unusual in that it has much evidence in textual that the composition could never have been written in the Middle East. There are references in the Enochian records that are quite specific, astronomical, that could only have been a almost circumpolar, it had to have been written very far north. We find the same picture unfolding in our researches of the Sumerian people. The histories of the Anunna, later demonized as Anunnaki by the Babylonians, the earliest histories of the Anunna, the records and traditions of the Sumerians, aren't of a people who began in the Near East. That's where they fled to after a reset, after a huge cataclysm. And this is mentioned in my other videos. 2239 BC, the Mediterranean and Black Seas were created in a day. Fleets of Caucasians fled North America, which was totally destroyed. They sailed right into the newly created Mediterranean and established many ports. Many of the nations of antiquity came from the Americas. It's not the other way around. The Sumerian traditions record a people from somewhere else who were bearded, tall, had blue eyes and green eyes. They showed up among a dark-skinned or dark-featured, dark-haired. The Sumerians prided themselves calling themselves the black-headed people. But the depictions of the Sumerians are just like the depictions of the Nordic-appearing people who appeared among the ancient Americans in the South, Viracocha, and it has so many different names. Even later, Quetzalcoatl. It's always a blue-eyed, green-eyed, bearded Caucasian that appears among indigenous peoples. So the Sumerian tablet appears in Georgia not because this businessman who wrote this record and dated it the 37th year of the reign of King Shulgi of Ur came to America. This is where he came from. This is one of his records that was left here, if he survived or not, in his flight from America to what later came to be called Sumer. Over 50 years ago, Erich von Däniken, in his epic book, Chariots of the Gods, wrote, "Why are the oldest libraries in the world secret libraries? What are people really afraid of? Are they worried that the truth, protected and concealed for so many thousands of years, will finally come to light?" The Great Pyramid was standing when antediluvian giants stalked the earth before the flood, when Abraham visited the Nile River civilization, when Joseph, who is called Zoser, ruled in Lower Egypt, and then later when the Amorite Hyksos departed Africa after a flood cataclysm in 1447 BC, which was immortalized as the Exodus of Israel. Although the pyramids are in Egypt, they are not Egyptian. The Great Pyramid of Cheops and many others found in Britain, Central and South America transcend ancient architectural knowledge in their construction and perfection in accordance with the heavenly bodies being built of stone edifices so heavy and cumbersome that not even today can be reconstructed by the machines and technologies utilized now. Many pharaohs throughout history have tried to claim the Great Pyramid, but the fact remains that there are no idols, artifacts, hieroglyphics within the pyramid to suggest an Egyptian origin. In the land of idols, could it be possible that their greatest engineering and architectural achievement could be devoid of all indications of ownership? Many Egyptian rulers have used the pyramids for various reasons throughout history as storage facilities and worship centers, even putting their dead in them. But these great monuments have endured from a time long before the very invention of writing, from before the epic of the Great Deluge. Cheops is dated to have lived around 3000 to 2500 BC, which biblically antedates the flood. Some associate this ancient king to be Enoch himself. Richard W. Noon wrote in his book 552,000 Ice, the Ultimate Disaster, that an early Arabian author named Muhammad ibn al-Hakim had written the pyramids were antediluvian and they resisted the force of the Great Flood. In his fascinating book, Mr. Noon goes further to cite a man who lived 11 centuries ago named Masaudi, an Arabic historian who translated an ancient Coptic tradition strangely reminiscent of the Enoch the prophet. Surid, one of the kings of Egypt before the flood, built the two great pyramids. The reason for the building the pyramids was the following dream, which happened to Surid 300 years previous to the flood. Enoch is recorded to have interpreted the dreams of giants in the Book of Giants, and other Dead Sea texts indicate that Enoch's antediluvian ministry involved dream interpretation and prophesying. Biblical evidence of Enoch's ministry and prophetic visions is found in the book of Jude in 14:15 and in the translation of his son's name, Methuselah, which literally means "my death will bring," which is a reference to the very cataclysm we know of as the Great Flood. And when Methuselah died, after 969 years of age according to the biblical record, the flood did happen that year in 2239 BC. Being antediluvian, there is no way that King Surid could have been Egyptian. Egyptologists claim that their ancestors planned and constructed the Great Pyramid, when in fact these ancient feats of engineering and precision belong to a high civilization long ago, antedating Egypt by at least 600 years, but more likely to even more distant times. Colin Wilson has produced fascinating evidence in his book From Atlantis to the Sphinx that an ancient relic called the Turin Papyrus records that before any human beings ruled Egypt, the land was governed by gods and demigods. Mr. Wilson goes on to cite an old Egyptian building text that record that long ago 7 sages built the mansion of the gods, the Great Pyramid, after surviving a catastrophic flood. These sages were identified as builder gods. The flood referred to here by arcane building texts is not the global catastrophe of the Bible, but to another flood that destroyed 1/3 of all the cities that is detailed in the book of Jasher in the year 3439 BC, or 456 Annus Mundi. Exactly 1,200 years before Noah's deluge in 2239 BC, or 432,000 days. Interestingly, this is confirmed by early Babylonian traditions and texts that claim that the 7 sages mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh were 7 master craftsmen who lived before the flood and taught mankind all crafts and civilization. The Anunna. These builder gods are unique because of their presence in both Babylonian and Egyptian writings. Their presence may be the only explanation for why civilization suddenly developed out of nothing ex nihilo, the Neolithic turning into vast urban centers with no developmental period between. Between these two classic cultures, there exists no archaeological evidence of ethnological, intellectual, or architectural development. Civilization just appeared. So profound was the belief in these 7 sages that nigh the entire human population after the flood of Noah's day anticipated their return. These disillusioned communities did not wait long. The Sumerian king list records that the pre-flood celestial kings that lived incredibly long lifespans had returned again after the flood that nearly eradicated humanity. This darkly divine kingship consisted of 50 godlike beings, of which 7 were the powerful giants called the 7 great Anunnaki. These giants not only brought mankind the mysticism and harmful sciences Noah suppressed at the bidding of the Creator, but these enormous god-men built the megalithic buildings, the walls of Uruk and other Mesopotamian cities, and monuments such as the Tower of Babel, all now reduced to ruins that still mystify modern archaeologists. Just as the Egyptian pharaohs claimed to be descendants of the early gods of Egypt, Mesopotamian rulers like King Shulgi of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, circa 2000 BC, proclaimed that he was a direct descendant of the first gods and kings of Uruk. Astonishing confirmation of this mysterious King Shulgi was unearthed in 1967 at the strangest of places, LaGrange, Georgia. How this ancient lead tablet came to be in prehistoric North America will never be fully explained. This artifact is written in Sumerian cuneiform, possibly an Akkadian copy that dates itself at the 43rd year of the reign of King Shulgi, a 3rd dynasty Sumerian king. Although there is much controversy as to the actual date of Shulgi's reign mentioned on the small tablet. But that's another story. The mass migration, fleets of thousands of ships, a human wave of Caucasians, tens of thousands of families and everything they owned fled North America. 2239 BC, escaping cities the Phoenix had completely buried in quakes and mud, fleets that sailed straight into the new Mediterranean Sea that the Phoenix Cataclysm had created in a single day. My friends, the history of our world is fascinating, and it is absolutely unknown to those we trust to teach it.
Our belief systems are a product of our programming. The reason I find myself very patient with others in trying to explain the architecture of my beliefs is because I understand that your frames of references are not like mine. They can't be. We are products of our programming. Belief systems are programming. Whatever you have input into your mind has formed the basis and the fundamentals of your beliefs. So when I come across people that are dead set on trying to convince me without knowing the amount of volume of material that I have researched, that the Anunnaki are gods that came from the sky, or about UFO phenomena. I have people trying to convince me about the Galactic Federation and the Pleiadians and the Arcturians, and it's difficult for me to communicate with these people because these are fundamentals that they've accepted. I don't really know why they accepted these things, but I know by virtue of my own studies that before the Golden Dawn Society, before the days of Charles Barrett, before the 1880s, maybe the mid to late 1870s, no one had ever published nor written anything about an alien species like Arcturians and Pleiadians and these fantastic ideas about alien civilizations and how they had planted like Atlantis and Lemuria. A serious academic study of Atlantis shows many parallels with ancient cultures concerning a global flood. I say global, but I mean worldwide. I don't want to offend the flat earthers. Flat earthers, basically, they have my respect because many of the data points are fascinating, and I agree with them. I agree that we do live on a flat plane because that is the programming that we're immersed within, and that everything above us is designed to mimic curvature, but it's not happening. But our belief systems, they guide us. They basically decide who we are. Many of the decisions we make on a daily basis are because of the fundamental beliefs that we maintain, and this becomes a problem. If you want to argue with somebody about the existence of Pleiadians and Arcturians or whatever, you need to cite source materials that are older than 1875, 1885. You will not find anything in the Gnostic records talking about these ancient species. There's no mentioning of these gods or these alien species in any ancient records that I'm familiar with. Even the very term Anunnaki is a late title. It is an epithet that is affixed to a belief in a group of basically personalities that existed 1,000 years earlier. When the Anunnaki emerged as a belief system, it was based off Babylonian interpretations of older Akkadian texts that they could barely understand. These Akkadian texts still preserve Sumerian logograms that were undeciphered, so they had left them in the text. These have been found. I have read the translations of George Smith, the Near Eastern text. I have studied over 700 boring pages of Asiatic researches. If you don't know what Asiatic researches is, then you probably don't know much about Near Eastern translations. 1890s to 1940s, Asiatic researchers published
over 100,000 cuneiform texts in Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Eblaetic, Ugaritic, Canaanite, Rashamra, Amorite, found in Egypt. Asiatic research is awesome, but it's specialist material. This was never material that was made available to the public. You had to go search for it. And in that material, the Anunnaki were always fantastic gods from the perspective of Babylonians, who were far more primitive than the culture that they were recording about. The original personalities were called Anunna. The Anunna themselves had much deification attached to them as well. But that's all it was, attachments. The further we go back in time, the more sophisticated we find the belief systems. They're not primitive. It's not like Jesus going around performing miracles and all this stuff that was added by the church to gain the appreciation of the pagan populations around them. So the original story of Jesus was absolutely devoid of the miraculous. But we've already covered these in prior videos. There are many books about that subject as well. When it comes to the Anunnaki, the belief systems prevalent today, flooding Facebook and YouTube and Reddit, everywhere, social media period, are of the Babylonian versions, the hyperinflated, fantastic deities, gods, Anunnaki. But that's all it is. It's not the original versions, because the original versions of the arrival of the very first Egyptians, the Neteru, the original versions of the first settlers among the Ubaid, who came with technologically advanced infrastructure among the Sumerians, recorded by Berosus of Babylon, recorded by many other authors. The original stories regard light-skinned, blue-eyed, and green-eyed people, sapphire and emerald-eyed people with alabaster skin, with long hair, horned helmets, and they arrived in fleets of ships. They had a very powerful infrastructure. It was only centuries later that these very people were regarded as gods. They were not regarded as gods when they first arrived. They were regarded as powerful. The problem with belief systems is that today, when we discuss issues that are Anunnaki or Igigi, Sumerian related, we always jump straight to the fantastic, thinking that in the Babylonian and Akkadian and Elamaic and Ugaritic records, that's all there was, but there's not. In Asiatic researches, you will find extremely boring, long texts about the Anunna and about business transactions, taxes, tax rolls, personal pronouns, people's names. You will find so much data and information. It's fantastic. Well, I hope they're all right, but it looks like several people had a pile up. But I'm not going to slow down. Anyway, I'm going south on I-45 heading to Cyprus. I got to go pick something up from a buddy of mine. Another errand I'm running for a friend. I've been doing Christmas lights all day. The money is so good. I just haven't been able to post in Archaix or on YouTube. I can only do it while I'm driving right now. I can't stop. I have a momentum right now. But it's very hard for me to deal with comments and questions on YouTube and Facebook when people make assertions about the Arcturians and the Pleiadians and so many other, the Nordics and all this. And their assertion carries the weight of, I'm supposed to know these things, these people exist, or carries the weight of inference that if you don't believe in this, then you just say you haven't done your homework, you ain't researched. But I have done my homework, and I'm very familiar with all the falsified documents of Madame Blavatsky and the whole Golden Dawn Society, where all these things originated. There are no ancient texts about these alien species. They do not exist. The further back that we study human interactions on clay, stone, cuneiform, totem societies, quipus, every form of communication, calendars, we find humans. And we find humans venerating more sophisticated, more powerful humans. We don't ever find extraterrestrials. We don't ever find aliens. When Sir Leonard Woolley excavated hundreds of crypts and tombs all in ancient Egypt and in Akkad and then in original Sumerian cities, it wasn't a surprise to him to find Caucasian mummies everywhere. You can't even cite these discoveries today without the Afrocentricists calling you racist. I have a lot of listeners on my channel, on Archaix. I don't mind that you believe in black superiority. That doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me that you're black and you believe that Jesus, Moses, Jeremiah, and everybody in biblical history was black. Adam and Eve was black. And you use all the syntax from Amorite syllabaries to try to prove your point. I don't mind that. I know what the ancient records say, and I'm not going to argue with you about it. I know for a fact that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, a swarthy skinned people were absolutely terrified when they started having white-skinned babies. And the first thing that flew out of their mouth was, these must be the children of the Watchers. These must be the children of angels, because we don't look like this. It's a major theme of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Check out the Lamech scroll. I believe it's also in the Apocalypse of Abraham. But aside from all that, I don't care about racial politics. I don't care about all that. All I want to do is get down to the truth. Thor Heyerdahl in the 1930s and 40s published the truth, and at that time it was not amazing to Thor Heyerdahl that when he went to Micronesian islands in the middle of nowhere, thousands of miles from Easter Island, he found the same stories of white-skinned, blue-eyed Caucasian mariners who visited the islands and gave them infrastructure, and gave them technology, and gave them religion, and gave them hope, delivered domesticated animals that they had never seen before. Thor Heyerdahl left Micronesia, went into Melanesia, and found the same thing. So he went into Polynesia, and thousands of islands in Polynesia, he visited those and found the exact same thing. So he went north to Hawaii, and to his astonishment, the same traditions were found. We know from the records of ancient India and the traditions, verbal, oral traditions surviving in Southeast Asia, that there was a massive continent in the Pacific Ocean that is no longer there. We know that some people believe it was called Lemuria. But we have no historical records about Lemuria. We don't have anything like that. Many of the beliefs on Facebook today are very entertaining and they're very interesting, but they dissipate. They just disassemble and they fall apart upon greater scrutiny. But the vast majority are not willing to do that scrutiny. It is frustrating trying to deal with people who have a Facebook education and they want to acquire more data from me, but in order to get the information that they want, their questions are automatically weighed with the assumption of that something is true or not. And that's very difficult for me to get around. If your question involves a premise that is untrue, it's very difficult for me to prove anything around that negative. So I find myself in a catch-22. Do I ignore comments on YouTube and Facebook? Because the answer is going to offend people. I have read Maureen Gallery Kovacs. She translates Sumerian. I have read Samuel Noah Kramer. He translates Sumerian. I have read George Smith. I have read the French scholar Lenormand. These people absolutely 100% do not agree with any tenet or translation that Zecharia Sitchin has ever published. These people have struggled to get education grants. These people have had to make money by publishing books. These people have had to do all these things. Zechariah Sitchin is not among them. Zechariah Sitchin was given grants by the Rockefellers to promote a version of world history that the Rockefeller Foundation wanted to promote. This is why Zechariah Sitchin has completely ignored many of the items that I show you as true, and I give you the source materials in my 30 videos called the Anunna files. The way you translate Sumerian calendars was known to Zechariah Sitchin, but the man is a deliberate liar. He had definite access to the very texted books that I read. He had access to a calculator. He could have done the calculations himself, but instead he went with the old Babylonian versions of Berosus, and he translated the Sumerian Shars as years, giving the Anunnaki a history of 450,000 years, which is absolute bullshit. It's 12 and a half centuries, which is 432,000 years. 432,000 turnings of the earth, days. During the vapor canopy period, they did not count the years the way we do. They counted the stars. And every single time the stars rotated on its axis, which was called Alpha Draconis, the eye of the dragon, every time the stars surrounded the dragon, which in the Alpha Draconis covers 1/3 or 33.3% of the circumpolar heavens. One turning was a shar. It was considered a throne, a king. One turning equaled a day. When you reinterpret all Sumerian dates, Mayan, Quiche, Zapotec, Olmec, Vedic and Sanskrit, Sumerian and Akkadian, and even Babylonian shards, if you retranslate those from years to days, the entire calendar makes sense, and you can date all the occupations of cities, wars, plagues, everything. It's all very, very comprehensible. And this is what Archaix 2.0 is about. Archaix 2.0 is me not only wrapping up much of my research, but my 30 videos on the Phoenix phenomenon are incomplete. I have many sources to divulge. They're boring, I get that. I went straight to the meat and potatoes in my videos, but now I'm going to give you it all. I'm going to give it to you in order. Archaix 2.0, we're going in depth, because I'm looking for those who want to challenge the thesis on the Phoenix thesis. I'm looking for those who would like to debate on a podcast or to challenge any of my references or any of my theories on the Great Pyramid. I would love to debate anyone who promotes Zechariah Sitchin and all his followers to go up against my Archaix 2.0 Anunna files. I'm republishing everything, but under a new format. I will be releasing all new videos on Facebook that are not even on YouTube. These are the things that have been going through my mind lately as I'm working. I'm working 70 to 80, maybe 85 hours a week right now. I'm doing all the electrical for Christmas lights. A lot of these are commercial jobs. I got some fantastic pictures of downtown Houston. I'm real busy. I can't pass up this money. Other things I've been attempting to do in my life have not worked. I tried to get a bunch of subscribers for my Opus, so by the 4th or 5th week, I would have had it coded, and then Opus would have taken off with just maybe a few hiccups. That didn't happen. I never got enough money to code it. I barely got enough money for gas for my van, so I pretty much abandoned that whole idea. I don't even care about it no more. So, I make more money in one day than I made an entire month on Opus subscriptions. So I'm going to pay for the coding myself. I'm going to pay for the coding of games here myself. I'm going to pay for everything I need. My new studio for Archaix 2.0. I've already got that in the works. I got some upgrades I need to do to my van, because I'm going to turn my van into a mobile studio as well. I'm going to go on the road a lot more, but the back of the van is not going to be used for contractor work anymore. It's going to be pretty lavish with a couch, computer. I'm going to start doing van vlogs when I'm going to travel. like I said, Archaix 2.0, it's going down. Things have been on my mind I want to do. I want to travel. There's people I want to meet. There's states I want to go to. And I know some of you out there are going to take me in, let me stay 2 or 3 nights instead of spending money in a hotel. And who knows, some of y'all might want to take advantage of the fact that I'm a master stone scaper. If there's anything you can imagine with rock and stone, I can build it. I may build flagstone patios on the road. I may do all that. There's nothing I can't do with stone. So, anyway, having said all that, the Anunnaki is very frustrating to me to talk to people about it, because every time that I'm dealing with somebody concerning the Anunnaki, I'm dealing with people who are fraught with information that is absolutely inaccurate, is unprovable, untenable, and 90% of it comes from theories promoted by JasonArchaix. Very few people understand the identity of the Anunnaki as promoted in the original scholarly monographs of Asiatic researchers George Smith, Maureen Gallery Kovacs, Samuel Noah Kramer, and a host of other Sumerologists who all 100% agree that they disagree with JasonArchaix. So, I also have, like I mentioned before, I have black viewers, listeners, as well as I should, because there ain't a racist bone in my body. I hate stupid people, but I just really don't have a lot in common with a lot of blacks. I'm in Central East Texas. I'm just really basically a poor old white boy, and I don't really have a lot in common with blacks. I do not like hip hop music. I don't like the culture. Don't give a damn about it. And you know what? It is what it is. And I've never been afraid to distance myself from things I dislike. It's as simple as that. But y'all seen in my other YouTube videos, my buddy Jason's black. He comes over all the time. We drink beer together every day. We're neighbors. But I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I don't give a damn. Personal opinions don't matter to me. Most people wouldn't tell me their opinions if they're in front of my face. So, concerning this Afrocentric belief system where history is being rewritten by people who are trying to promote basically black people were the people of the Bible, black people were the movers and shakers of world history. Stolen History is a book that I studied and read, and it gives that same premise that history has been stolen by the blacks and all that stuff. Man, let me tell you, you're going to get real upset if I start publishing my source materials on what has actually been found and censored. Let me tell you something, man. The academic society that we live in today censors about 90% of the information that is revealed to the public. Let me tell you, those reliefs of Ramesses II showing black pyramids, those aren't pyramids, my brothers. If you found out what those really were, because they were translated in the 1890s, early 1910s up to the 1920s, and it was widely published what many of those Egyptian hieroglyphs meant, and why all the Nubians and all of Egypt were castrated. Let me tell you something, man. Those black pyramids weren't made of rock. Blacks and Egyptians had problems. This whole belief system that black people were Egyptians, well, the Egyptians disagree. Black people were ancient Hebrews, well, the Egyptians disagree with that. The Amorites disagree with that. The Hurrians disagree with that. The problem with Afrocentrism is that the people that are promoting it aren't doing their homework. All you have to do is take a visual tour of the Temple of Karnak in Egypt. The Temple of Karnak in Egypt has beautifully painted racial portraits of every known culture and people in the world in 1300 BC. Don't take my word for it. Get those textbooks out. And you will find exactly what Hebrews look like. You will find exactly what the Tamahu look like. You will find what the Anakim look like. You will find what Semitic people, what Egyptians, what Arabs, what Nubians look like, what sub-Saharan blacks look like. You will find all that on the Temple of Karnak with the appropriate identifying Egyptian hieroglyphs. So Afrocentrism has a lot it has a lot of appeal to people because everybody wants to believe that they come from some badass history and all that stuff. Let me tell you something. It's really embarrassing. I hate having to say this, but it's necessary because I'm getting more and more guys that are trying to promote that on my channel, leaving these comments and all that. And you're showing me your hand. If we were playing poker, I would have all your money. You need to do your homework before you make comments on my YouTube channel because I'm going to address them in my videos. If you want to promote that black superiority crap about from world history, that y'all are all this and all that and we stole your history and all that, you need to explain why there was only 26 dynasties in ancient Egypt. Because if you can't explain why there was 26 dynasties in ancient Egypt, you haven't done your homework, or you're being a hypocrite and you just don't want people to know. But I'm going to tell you right now because you brought it up. There were 25 dynasties in ancient Egypt. The first one were written by Professor Waddell. They were all Caucasian. The ancient Egyptians themselves even recorded the arrival of Manishtu. Later, the Greeks called him Menes, the civilization builder. But we'll even go later than that. The Amorites, the Hurrians, the Persians, they all ruled the thrones of Egypt. Native-born Egyptians also were pharaohs, but most of the time Egypt was occupied. Nefertiti, King Tut, they weren't native Egyptians. They were from the Amorite dynasty of Mitanni, and any scholar will tell you that. Even the Hittites would send their sons and their daughters to ancient Egypt to be raised, and they would rule on the throne. Upper Egypt was given basically the respect of having a native-born Egyptian on the throne, but there was always two Egypts, and one was led by Caucasians. It was the Egypt that was right there. It was Lower Egypt, which was at the Egyptian Delta, where the Great Pyramid is situated, where the holy city of On, which was called ancient Anu, which was built by not Egyptians, but Akkadian people who had fled Sumer. All this is written in the records with source materials and everything for you to know in the writings of Professor Waddell. I released a video about Professor Waddell's findings. They're fascinating. Now, the reason there was 26 Egyptian dynasties and not more is because the very first time in recorded history that a black man sat on the throne of Egypt was the last dynasty that ever existed, because Egypt totally collapsed into disarray. It was the 26th dynasty, and anybody can Google this because it's called the Nubian dynasty of Egypt. It is the end of ancient Egypt's autonomy. After that, the Egyptians became slaves to the Assyrians. Then they became slaves to the Persians. Then they became slaves to the Babylonians. Then they became slaves to the Macedonians. Then they became slaves to the Ptolemies. Queen Cleopatra, the last of her line, was not Egyptian. She was not black. She was a little red-headed Macedonian girl, a Ptolemy. And the poor girl decided to fall in love with Mark Antony. And in 31 BC, a phoenix year, when Phoenix appeared over Egypt like a raging fiery dragon, which is in the historical record, in the same year, great earthquakes destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed much of Judea and several Greek cities. Tsunamis plagued the coasts of the Mediterranean, and Octavian captured Mark Antony, and Cleopatra committed suicide, ending the Caucasian Egyptian dynasty. If you want to study black history and you want to study black deal, I will help you. I will educate you. I will show you very good source materials. But don't come to me with that bullshit that blacks ruled Egypt, founded Egypt, and were sitting on the throne of Egypt, because it's not true at all. The only dynasty that was black, that was Nubian, that was African, was the one that collapsed. Now, having said that, we have another problem, because there's another school of thought who wants to claim that the ancient Olmecs were black too, and it's not true. The Olmec ideograms very closely match the older 300-year-older Shang dynasty pictograms from China, and we have actual historical Chinese records about the fleet of Wu. 255,000 Chinese people fled their own country in 1135 BC, which was a phoenix year. They fled because the mandate of heaven had changed. If you don't understand what that means, I'm going to tell you right now. The Chinese have a very interesting tradition concerning the stars and the sun. If the stars and the sun ever misbehave and people die or go hungry because of it, they have to change their emperor because the mandate of heaven has changed. If the emperor can't maintain order, he can't stay as emperor. So when the mandate of heaven changes, the people rise up in rebellion and they overthrow their government. The Chinese were the first revolutionaries. The Americans weren't. This is how they did it. But in 1135 BC, Wu lost. Wu left. 250,000 people. And there's many scholars who are of the opinion that those 250,000 people ended up on the far western shores of the Yucatan, Central America. They began building pyramids and cities that were very Asiatic. But they integrated with the locals and began mimicking their architecture. And they moved to the Gulf of Mexico, where they built the mighty Olmec Empire, pre-Mayan people. These are the people who were the ancestors of the Maya. This is why the Mayan calendar copies the older Olmec version. The very last year recorded on any Olmec steles or stelae is the year which translates in our own Anno-Domini calendar as 31 BC, which was the Phoenix year when Queen Cleopatra died. I'm not making any of this up. I have all the source materials to prove it. Hell, I even mentioned them in my videos where you can find that data. But in Archaix 2.0, we're going straight to the sources. I'm going to bore the shit out of you with where all this information's coming from and where JasonArchaix's got his theories from. The theories are my own, but they were put together from all this material that I have read. Now, this second school of thought about Afrocentrism holds that there was an African civilization in Central America, and it's partially true. However, there's a lot that needs to be picked out of it. There's a lot of bones that need to be picked out of that meat. Let me explain. The Olmecs had taken in some foreign artisans, and it's in their statuary. It's all over the Olmec ruins and pyramids. They venerated these people. These people were Caucasian. The statues are of bearded, straight Nordic-nosed white people. They didn't revere them as gods. They revered them as master artisans, people who could do incredible things with rocks and stones. And they had them among their culture, but they didn't have them ruling over them. But there was a significant population of Caucasians living in Central America in 1000 BC. Now, we know this from Mediterranean traditions and records. We know who these people were. We know them as the Phoenicians. And we know by virtue of our studies that Phoenicians was nothing but an all-encompassing term describing many peoples, most of them that were of Israelite pedigree. And that's what the Israelites were famous for. The prophecies of Abraham are very specific. His descendants, the Israelites, would populate all the isles of the sea and bring blessings to all the isles of the oceans. That's a prophecy in Genesis. That's exactly what Caucasians have done. If you don't know your pre-industrial age Chinese and Japanese history, then you wouldn't know this. But China and Japan owe their entire infrastructures to Caucasians, because we didn't go over there to conquer Japan and China. We went over there and we made them open their borders by military force, and then we shoved our technology on them so they could come be on par with us. Who does that? We were fulfilling ancient prophecies, Abrahamic code prophecies. But who does that? Who? No black culture in history has ever invaded other countries to bless them. It never happened. It's never happened. Caucasians do it all the time. We're builders of infrastructures. We bless other nations. Where we go wrong is morality. And then we suffer by the inclusion of other races who do not appreciate our values and traditions. This is what happened in 1135 BC when the Shang Dynasty exiles arrived in the Americas, and over a 300-year period, they became the Olmecs. This is why the Olmecs treasured jade. This is why their pictographs and ideograms look so much like Shang Dynasty pictographs. It's fascinating. The whole study is fascinating. These are not my conclusions. Other scholars have made the connections between the Shang Dynasty Chinese and the Olmecs. I didn't make these connections. I just collected the data. Now, something terrible happened in Central America around 31 BC. Their entire infrastructure collapsed, all the cities collapsed, populations dwindled, there was war, plague, disease, it showed all over this, everything, it was terrible. Suddenly, the black Negro population that was in Central America broke free because they were not citizens of the indigenous Central Americans who were much lighter skinned. They were basically Indian people. The Indians were running the civilization. Caucasians lived among them, but they were only like hired artisans. Now, the black population was getting more and more populous. But around 31 BC, the infrastructure collapsed. Other American cultures invaded the Olmec, took many of them captive, but they did not take the blacks and whites. They took the people of their own race, although they spoke different Nahuatl languages and stuff like that. Quiche. What is fascinating is that many people have found particularly interest in they call them the Olmec heads, where it shows giant negroid faces made out of these huge giant boulders. And we're told that this is evidence of a fantastic African American civilization that was in damn it, I'm in the wrong lane. That was in Central America. But it's not evidence. It's evidence of giant round rocks with negroid faces. That's all it's evidence of, because that's not what happened. The negroid faces found on the Olmec statuary are always angry and real. Listen to me. It's gangsterism all over again. That's what it is. It's all over their faces. Anybody can Google the Olmec heads and you will see nothing but gangster rapper faces on there. Call me a racist if you want to. I don't care. It's in the historical record. Look at the pictures your damn self. What happened is the blacks took over. Infrastructure had collapsed. Blacks are physically phenomenal. They're absolutely, back then, bred for war and work. And that's what happened. That is, I'm taking the right turn now. I'm doing good now. You would think I could multitask since I'm sitting here threatening my life. Doing a van vlog. Changing lanes. In the middle of an intersection. Doing dumb shit. Alright, anyway. The Olmec heads. This is what happened. The liberal academic society is going to use this as evidence, although there's no other evidence whatsoever. It was all Olmec. They're not a black people. So what happened was the blacks basically enslaved the Caucasian artisans and made them take these giant Central American spheres. Those round boulders were already over 1,000 years old when this happened. In fact, they were already 18 centuries old. They were built from 1899 to 1687 BC. And I have recorded these events in Chronicon. Those giant boulders have been found everywhere in Central America. They were earthquake dampeners. Those things would behave a certain way when aftershocks or when the earth was vibrating, and it's just they're highly crystalline. But many researchers like Ivar Zapp, who published a book about it, published an entire book about just those giant metal stone spheres that have been found all over Central and South America. Well, the blacks gained control and forced the Caucasians to do that. There's no telling how long this lasted, 10, 15, 20 years or whatever. But it didn't last long. Caucasians were slaves to blacks after the Native Americans had their whole infrastructure collapsed in a cataclysm and followed by war and famine. But it didn't last long because nearby cultures, we have found the friezes, we have found the reliefs, we have found the paintings, we have found the race war. Don't take my word for it. I'm going to show you the source materials. I'm going to take you to where those temples are. But the blacks and the whites were killed together when Native American military forces invaded the area and took those ruined Olmec cities back. They took those cities back, and the short little empire of the black Olmec gangsters, or whatever you want to call them, ended just like that. They were butchered. We have reliefs of Caucasians and blacks butchered side by side, hands and feet chopped off, heads chopped off. So that pretty much, that's why I don't really entertain the comments and all that. Temple of Karnak in Egypt's going to show you what an ancient Hebrew looks like. Let me tell you something, he wasn't black. He was Semitic. It's going to show you what the ancient Israelites look like. And for those of you who are a little confused, and you don't know if ancient Israelites truly existed, I'm going to tell you now they did. But they weren't called Israelites. Never in their history were they called Israelites. That is a name that the Jews who rewrote their history gave them later. In the historical record, they were called by two major names known by several civilizations. One of them was Bet Sak, House of Isaac. Bet Sak, and the other one was Bet Omri, which was the House of Omri. In some cultures pronounced it Qumri. Others the Simri, others the Samaria, others the Sumerians. These people populated all of Europe and Central Asia. So that pretty much concludes my rant about all these comments about Afrocentrism. You can continue to make those comments, and I'm going to continue to address them in videos, but sooner you're going to get tired of it. Because if you don't have, it doesn't matter if some black guy published a 10,000 page, 7-volume book proving that all the most advanced civilizations in world history were all black. It doesn't matter if you publish that at all. It says nobody in ancient history agreed with him. There are no texts to verify that. All the reliefs and statuary don't agree with it. So it doesn't matter if your source materials are only citing relative things. Just like the Pleiadians and the Arcturians and all these alien species, if you're only citing materials that go back to the Golden Dawn Society of 1880 and 1890s, and there's no actual real historical records to even talk about all these things, then I can't argue with you. You have accepted a paradigm for which I can't defend from. I cannot use any positives to defend your position, which is a negative. It's not going to happen. So I'll address them in videos, but I just can't answer your comments. It's not going to happen. So let's talk simulation theory. Many people in the Archaics Facebook group struggle with the idea of being in a simulation, and this is understandable. You're supposed to struggle with it. You have embedded within you synaptic fail-safes that make sure that cognitive dissonance plagues you every time that you begin to thinking outside of normal frames of reference. This is normal. What's truly amazing is that you can entertain the idea at all. It's really a harrowing thought, but it's also liberating. Many of you struggle with the idea of simulation theory because simulation theory is amorphous. It's ever changing, and this also is normal. It is to be expected of when a sentient being begins to undergo the metamorphosis of an idea, of a concept, we grow into ideas. This is such a bizarre subject matter because it alienates us from the very reality that we have accepted all of our lives. You stub your toe, you feel pain. You burn your finger, you feel pain. Therefore, pain to you is absolute evidence that you're alive and that something can hurt you. But you can't think outside the perimeters of your programming. The programming is beautiful. It works exactly the way it's supposed to work. It is very difficult for us on the inside of a bubble to see outside of that bubble, to see things as they really are. But the evidence that things are not what they seem is everywhere, especially in the historical record. Things just don't make sense. The more we study history, the more we see edits, redactions. We see whole reality tunnels that have been grafted in and taken away. We see existences that had no existence at all. We find things that they just don't comport with anything that we would ever have believed to have existed, and yet they did. But there's been a massive amount of energy expended in trying to convince the public certain things either did or did not happen. It's a fascinating study. It is a fascinating study, actually. But by virtue of long years of research, I came to the conclusion of simulation theory because nothing else made sense. And let me explain. Because my beliefs are a product of my programming actually has a lot more input than the average person. Many years spent in prison studying books on physics, books on history, books on government, books on philosophy, medicine, whatever I get my hands on. That became my new religion, the acquisition of information. But the acquisition of information always caused me problems because paradigms that I'd formerly accepted would instantly have to be modified when I had to input the new information. One example being so many different historical records. Oh, you know what? I even released a video about Mithridates, one of the greatest enemies Rome ever fought. That's why you don't know anything about him. It's because it's just like World War II. His history is recorded and written by the victors. You don't know the other side and what they were fighting for. Even today, Americans, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, people in the UK, Europeans are absolutely baffled today about the state of affairs and what's going on in the world. Well, all this crazy liberal bullshit that's being pushed on everybody, and they're finger pointing, and everybody's finger pointing at politicians and all that stuff, when the true enemy, who has completely isolated themselves to the point where even if you mention their pedigree, you will go to prison. They will censor you. There are people in European prisons right now for naming these people. They own the World Banks. They own all the studios. They own all of Hollywood, MGM Grand. They own all this shit. They own all the media outlets. They have changed their names to conceal their identities in every country that they're in, not just America. These people are fucking murderers. They're vicious, but you can't talk about them. You can't name them. They rewrote the Bible to make you think that they were God's chosen people. These people are fucked up. But you know what? Nobody's finger pointing them, and that's exactly the way they want it. They've got everybody finger pointing the Russians, finger pointing their politicians, finger pointing Boris or Biden or Trudeau, whatever his name is in Canada, the Australian rulers. Everybody's finger pointing the puppets, but nobody is blaming the current state of affairs worldwide to the true culprits, because they have completely protected and insulated themselves ever since World War II, when they absolutely destroyed Germany, because the Germans did one thing that they could not allow. they kicked them out. Germans kicked them out their country because they got tired of them messing with their finances, messing with their economy, coin clipping. That's what these people have done for 2,000 years. They are the enemies. They are the absolute enemies of Western people, Western civilized people. They have completely integrated among us and made all our movies, and dumbass Americans and Europeans watch these movies and worship and praise these people, not knowing the true vile feminist people they are. Read the Talmud, you'll read all about them. Needless to say, Mithridates, his history was edited out. We only have it in bits and pieces, but he was a phenomenal individual. I mentioned him because of something very strange. Just when he was going to beat the crap out of the Roman armies, an object fell from the sky in between both armies. The same thing recorded by Robert Greene in his historical anecdotes on a battle that was about to happen with the Chinese. But it happened many other times. Freak tidal waves that take out an entire army that's going to go oppose another military force. We have tamperings with history. It has happened so many times when these freak occurrences happen that change the course of human events. As if somebody was observing events and they had to effect a quick correction to change the outcome. This has happened over and over and over and over, and I have documented this many times. In taking all of these as a data point, I had to introduce that into my paradigm. I had to introduce the fact that despite academia's attempt to tell me that mice brought the Great Black Death from China to Europe, but the local historians of the time recorded that putrefied, decayed, dead animal parts were raining from the sky, and everywhere they hit the ground, the plague fell. And many of these reports recorded in 1347 AD that cigar-shaped objects were floating through the sky, spraying mists over the forests and opening their bellies to dump decomposing body parts of forest animals. Okay, I am not like a lot of people. I understand that many people go through Facebook and go through Google, YouTube, they read the books at home, they do their studies, and they compartmentalize their discoveries. I can't do that. I'm an assimilator. When I accept something is true by virtue of my research and I see enough compatibility with other sources, I have to accept that into my paradigm. I have to accept that into my belief system. So now I have these strange objects that are causing plagues, killing humans, which means that at first they had to abduct forest animals in these vessels that are shaped like cigars. I don't even know if they're UFOs or vessels. To me, I have over and over elucidated in my videos that I believe that the sky contains a vast mechanical apparatus. It is harrowing. It has the ability to remove populations, bury cities in mud. It is giant machinery hidden by the blue of the sky, hidden by the stellosphere, hidden by the sun. Our sky has rained some phenomenally harrowing things upon us in the last 3,000 or 4,000 years of recorded history, and we have the documents to prove it. And I have to incorporate that into my paradigm if this is happening. I have to incorporate into my belief system, after so much research, that North America was once a thriving, technologically advanced civilization. We find pieces of it all the time, but they're at 60 to 200 foot depth. I have to accept in my paradigm and in my belief system that a technologically advanced civilization that understood the value of planar boring, of hyperbolic curves, of boring through 70 and 80 levels of rock, each level 3 and 4 feet thick, to laser precision, tolerances on the sides of some of these stones are 0.25%, which is way smoother than marble on bank buildings. I have to accept into my paradigm that a civilization in antiquity that built the Great Pyramid used technologically advanced procedures and machinery and equipment that we do not have access to today. I have to accept into my paradigm that at one time, our world was inhabited by a thriving civilization that probably had technological achievements far superior to anything we have yet imagined. They left no written records because they couldn't. All of their knowledge was preserved either electronically or holographically. That technology is now gone. So when I make discoveries and I conduct my research, I have to accept. Once I accept something is true, it becomes a part of the whole. I'm building a tapestry, and many people can't see what I'm talking about because they have not actually examined the individual threads by which I've woven. Simulation theory is the exact same way. I don't know how to deal or even respond to people that are hopeless, or they think terrible things are going to happen in the future, or they're worried about the apocalypse, or what am I going to do? This materialist mindset is because they are hardwired into their avatars, and they actually believe that all of this bullshit is real. I know, man, it sounds so crazy to my listeners. I understand that you can't follow me. I'm driving this van going through the road, and I know it's all simulated. I know that every move I'm making. I also know that nothing in the ancient past ever happened, but all the clues as to what could happen in the future is in the past. I am a student of P.D. Alspinski. Some of you know what I'm talking about. We're in the middle of an ancestor simulation. What I need you to understand is that hope is not all lost, because nothing at all has actually really happened. You and I are in a simulation right now. This simulation began not too long ago. We as the human species are trying to figure something out. We have a problem. The entire history that we perceive right now about the Anunnaki, about who Caucasians ruling different civilizations, infrastructures, all this stuff, all the Anunnaki histories, man, all of this is entirely a part of a series of simulations that are being conducted right now because we're in trouble and we're trying to figure out how we can survive. We are sentient, immortal beings trying to figure out what we're going to do when the Nemesis star explodes. None of the stuff in my Anunna Files videos has happened yet. It's all simulated. But it could happen. This is what I'm trying to convey to people in my new Archaix 2.0. All this material from the ancient world didn't happen yet. We're trying to figure out which avenues or reality tunnels will be operative in history, but history hasn't happened yet. We're still running simulations. But when we're done running simulations, we're probably setting things in motions that we cannot change. So before we set those things in motions, we're going through a trial and error period right now. That's what history is. This is why we have fossilized earthworms and fossilized jellyfish. There were some simulations that did not work out. We ended them. Those simulations were flash frozen. The technology I'm describing is not entirely computer. It is almost like, I don't know, man. I don't know of a word in our vernaculars that could describe a biological hologram. I don't know one. A sentient biogram. I don't know, man. I have to make up words to describe the technology. But we're in it right now. None of this shit matters. It matters to your avatar because you're playing a part. But that girl listening to my video right now who gets up in the morning and stares at herself in the mirror and doesn't like what she sees, but she's okay with it once she puts on about a quarter ounce of makeup, none of that's real. None of that's real. You're painting an avatar. We're all avatars. There is no way that this reality that we live in right now is so perfect. Everything is absolutely tailored to keep the human body existing and living. It's all simulated. It may not be a computer program, but it's definitely holographic. Get away from this loud truck. So, my personal belief system is that we are currently running simulations. This is why we have so many anomalies in the historical record that cannot be rectified. This is why we have Mandela effect. This is why we have deja vu, coincidence, and synchronicity. This is why strange things happen at the most unusual, unexpected times. There are edits in the simulation. The controllers, the custodians are us. I don't believe in gods. I don't believe in, I don't believe in none of that bullshit no more. 40 years of Southern Baptist Puritanism burned away any belief in an actual God over this simulated construct other than the demiurge. If there's a ruling entity over this bullshit, he's an evil son of a bitch. But that too just might be a program. Because if hardship and if the negative default programming wasn't there, then our potential would be endless. There very well could be not only one simulation, but an interference simulation that was introduced by an enemy or somebody who had an opposing ideology and had done their own programming. The simulation may have run haywire and we're in it. But my personal theory is that we're living out historical routines to a sudden end. Those of you who have seen my Archaic Paradox video about 2178, you also know that I am firmly 100% convinced that there is a definite year these simulations will end. And whatever we have discovered or concluded or set in motion by then is set in motion. And there's no more changing it.